She didn't even see it coming. Amara Bennett, a woman who had walked into conflict zones, negotiated with warlords, and rebuilt communities from rubble, stood frozen in the doorway of the Kong ancestral mansion while Jae-hyun's mother looked her up and down like she was something dragged in off the street. Then, without a single word, the older woman turned her back and walked away. Not a greeting. Not even the pretense of one. Just a turned back. In front of everyone. And every person in that room saw it and said nothing. If that had been you, standing there in your finest dress, your husband's family watching you be dismissed like you were invisible, what would you have done? If this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because what Jae-hyun does when he walks through those doors will leave you speechless. Like this video, and drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. The invitation had come on a Tuesday, slipped inside a cream envelope with the Kang family crest embossed in gold on the front. Amara had held it between her fingers for a long moment before setting it on the kitchen counter, then picking it up again, reading the formal Korean script that her husband had carefully translated for her the night before. The annual Kang family ancestral banquet. All family members are expected to attend. She had looked at Jae-hyun over the top of the envelope. He was standing at the stove, stirring something that smelled like the doenjangji gai he made when he was trying to soften news before delivering it. All family members, she repeated. He didn't look up from the pot. Your family. Your mother doesn't think so. That made him stop stirring. He turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes that she had learned to read over 3 years of marriage. That particular mix of guilt and love and exhaustion that meant he already knew exactly what she was about to say, and he didn't have a clean answer for it. She'll come around, he said. Amara set the envelope back on the counter. You've been saying that for 2 years. I know. Jay. I know, Amara. He crossed the kitchen and took her hands in his, and his thumbs traced small circles over her knuckles, the way they always did when he was asking her for patience without actually using the word. This banquet, it matters to the family. The elders, the older uncles, my mother. If you're there, if they see you beside me, it changes the conversation. It stops being about whether they accept you and starts being about the fact that you're already here. She studied his face. She had met Kang Jae-hyun 4 years ago at a fundraising gala for a clean water initiative she'd organized in West Africa. He had been the only person in a room full of wealthy donors who actually asked her about the logistics of the pipeline, rather than just writing a check to feel good about himself. He asked sharp questions. He remembered what she said. He called 2 weeks later, not to flirt, but to follow up on a detail about the water filtration system that had been bothering him. She had fallen in love with his mind first. Everything else came after. But she had also known, from almost the very beginning, that loving him meant inheriting a problem she had not created. His family was old money, old tradition, old blood, and she was none of the things they had spent decades grooming him to choose. What if it doesn't change anything? She asked. He squeezed her hands. Then we deal with it together. But I need you there, Amara. I need them to see us together. She wanted to say no. Every instinct she had built over 38 years of navigating spaces that weren't designed for her was screaming at her to say no. She said yes. The emergency call came the morning of the banquet. Jae-hyun was knotting his tie when his phone buzzed 3 times in rapid succession, the pattern she recognized as the signal from his second-in-command, Min-jun, that meant something had broken inside the organization and it couldn't wait. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. What happened? Amara asked. Conflict in Busan. 2 of the lieutenant families are at the edge of something that could turn ugly. How ugly? He met her eyes in the bathroom mirror. Ugly enough that I have to go. She understood what that meant before he said it. She had married a man who ran one of the most powerful criminal empires on the Korean peninsula. She had done that with open eyes, and she did not pretend to herself that love erased what he was. She had simply decided that who he was to her, honest, deliberate, unexpectedly tender, was the thing she was choosing. But moments like this reminded her of the cost. Go, she said. Amara, go handle it. She smoothed his tie for him, then pressed her palm flat against his chest. I'll go to the banquet. He caught her hand before she could pull it away. You don't have to. You said you needed me there. That was before Jay. She looked at him steadily. I'm not going to run away from your family because you can't be there to hold my hand. I'm your wife. I'll be there. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't quite name, pride maybe, but threaded with something darker, something that looked almost like fear. If anything feels wrong, he said quietly, you call me. Immediately. You don't sit through anything for my sake. You hear me? I hear you. He kissed her forehead. He held it there for a moment longer than usual. Then he left. She stood in the bathroom alone and looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress she'd bought specifically for this evening, not because it was what they would expect, but because it was what she wanted to wear, and she had decided months ago that she would not reshape herself into something smaller just to make his family more comfortable. Her hair was natural, pulled up in a style her mother had taught her when she was 9 years old. Her grandmother's gold earrings caught the light. She looked beautiful. She knew she looked beautiful. She also knew it wouldn't matter. The Kong ancestral mansion sat behind iron gates at the end of a private road lined with old pine trees. The driver pulled through without stopping. Her name was on the guest list, at least. And Amara stepped out into the cold evening air and looked up at the building. It was the kind of house designed to make you feel small. 6 stories of stone and glass and tradition, lit from the outside with lights that turned everything gold. Through the tall windows, she could see figures moving in formal dress, chandeliers. The kind of formal arrangement that said this family has always been important before you ever set foot inside. She straightened her spine. She walked in. The entry hall was already crowded. She recognized a few faces, cousins she had met briefly at a family gathering 8 months ago. 2 of the older uncles who had shaken her hand with the stiffness of people who had been instructed to be polite. No one moved toward her. No one smiled in recognition. Then Jae-hyun's mother appeared at the top of the staircase. Choi Soon-yi was 62 years old and moved like a woman who had never once questioned her own authority. She was elegant in a severe way, silk hanbok, silver hair pinned back, posture that had probably been perfected over decades of deciding who was and wasn't worthy of her attention. She looked down at Amara from the top of the stairs. Their eyes met. And then Choi Soon-yi turned away. Not hurriedly, not with any visible emotion, simply turned, as though Amara were a piece of furniture she had already assessed and dismissed, and walked back into the room behind her. The housekeeper appeared at Amara's elbow almost immediately, as though the queue had been prearranged. Mrs. Kang, please follow me. I'll show you to your seat. Amara followed. The banquet hall was long and formal, the ancestral tables stretching what felt like the length of a city block. There were photographs along the walls, generations of Kang men, serious-faced, standing in postures of ownership. Amara scanned the seating arrangement as she followed the housekeeper down the length of the room and understood immediately. Her seat was at the far end, not beside a place marked for Jae-hyun, not near the elders. At the far end, beside an empty chair that belonged to no one, near a cluster of younger cousins who looked up at her arrival with expressions she recognized from every room she'd ever walked into where she wasn't expected to belong. She sat down. She unfolded her napkin. She placed it in her lap. She poured herself water. No one spoke to her. The first hour passed. The way the first hour of endurance always passes, slowly, and with the particular heaviness of being surrounded by noise that is deliberately not directed at you. Conversations flowed around her table like water around a stone. She ate the food placed in front of her. She watched. She was very good at watching. It was a skill she had developed young, growing up Black in spaces that required you to read rooms before entering them, to anticipate hostility before it arrived, to calculate exits. She had used that skill in conflict zones. She used it now. The cousins to her left were whispering. She caught fragments. Doesn't even speak Korean. I don't know what he was thinking. Of all the women he could have chosen, she lifted her water glass and took a slow sip. Across the table, one of the aunts, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Park, whom she had met exactly once, was watching her with the expression of someone waiting for a mistake. Amara met her eyes and smiled. Mrs. Park looked away first. That small victory cost Amara nothing and felt like it cost her everything at the same time. The first real blow came when the seating for the second course was rearranged. It was presented as a tradition, the family gathering closer together around the head of the table for the ceremonial portion of the meal. A shifting of chairs, a reorganization that everyone seemed to expect and know the choreography for. When it was done, Amara was seated even further from the center than she had started. She looked around at the space that had opened between her chair and the nearest cluster of family members. About 4 feet. 4 feet that might as well have been 4 miles. Nobody acknowledged it. Nobody said anything. It had simply happened, the way certain cruelties always happen, through systems and movements that everyone participates in while maintaining the appearance that no one made a choice. Jaehyun's younger sister found her during the moment between courses when people moved around. Park Ji-yeon was 26, beautiful in the particular way of women who know exactly how to use their beauty, and she had never once pretended to be warm to Amara. She crossed the room with a glass of wine in her hand and stopped beside Amara's chair. "You look tired," Ji-yeon said, in English, very deliberately, because she was fluent and wanted Amara to know it. "I'm fine," Amara said. "My brother should have warned you." Ji-yeon tilted her head, studying her with something that was almost clinical. "This isn't the kind of event where—" She paused, as though searching for a word. "Outside guests usually feel comfortable." "I'm not a guest." Ji-yeon smiled. It was a perfect smile. "No," she agreed. "You're not." And then she let the pause do the work that the words didn't need to do, making clear that not a guest and belonging here were two entirely different things. Amara looked at her steadily. "Was there something you needed, Ji-yeon?" "I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable." "I'm fine." "Because some people—" Ji-yeon swirled her wine. "In your position, sitting where you're sitting, might feel a little out of place. I would hate for you to feel out of place at my family's table." She walked away before Amara could respond. Amara picked up her fork. Her hand was perfectly steady. She was proud of that steadiness, and she hated that she needed to be proud of it. The whispers grew louder as the evening pressed on, and they stopped even pretending to be whispers. Mrs. Park made a comment about Amara's hair that she delivered to the table at large, in Korean, with a laugh that several of the other aunts echoed. Amara understood enough Korean to catch the shape of it, even if she missed individual words. She understood the laughter. One of the older cousins, a man in his 40s who had introduced himself at the door with the careful neutrality of someone performing civility, said something to the cousin beside him that made them both look at Amara, then look away. Then Jaehyun's mother spoke. She was seated at the head of the table, and she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room had a way of going quiet for Choi Soon-yi, the way rooms do for women who have spent decades ensuring their authority is structural rather than performed. She spoke in Korean, slowly, clearly, looking down the length of the table at Amara. The housekeeper, who was standing near the wall and clearly didn't know whether she was supposed to translate, went very still. One of the younger cousins, a girl of about 20, who had the eyes of someone who was genuinely uncomfortable with what was happening, translated in a low voice. She wasn't directed to. She just did it, maybe because silence felt worse. "She says," the girl began, then stopped, started again. "She says that the Kong name has endured for 6 generations because the family understood the importance of," another pause, "of preserving what it means to be a Kong, and that some traditions cannot be bent, no matter how much someone might," the girl's voice dropped, "want to belong to something they were not born into." The room was absolutely quiet. Amara set her fork down on the plate with a sound that seemed very loud. She looked at Choi Soon-yi. She looked at her directly, the way she had looked at government officials in collapsed states, who told her that food aid couldn't be distributed to certain villages. The same look. Calm and without apology, and containing within it the full knowledge of exactly what was being done and who was doing it. She did not stand up. She did not raise her voice. She picked her fork back up and continued eating, because her husband had asked her to be here, and she had said yes. And she was going to hold on to that yes for as long as she possibly could. But something had shifted in her chest, some quiet thing that had been holding firm all evening, and she could feel it beginning, very slowly, to crack. She was still holding herself together when she heard the doors at the far end of the hall open. She didn't look up. She wasn't expecting anyone. She was focused entirely on the task of breathing evenly and keeping her expression neutral and not giving this room the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. So she didn't see the figure in the doorway. She didn't see him stop. She didn't see his face change. She didn't know that Jae-hyun had come home early. She didn't know that he had been standing there, in the shadow of those doors, utterly still, listening and watching and understanding, for the first time with the full weight of someone who could no longer tell himself it wasn't as bad as he feared, exactly what his silence had cost her. He didn't move. That was the first thing. Jae-hyun stood in the shadow of the doorway, and he did not move, because moving would mean entering the room, and entering the room would mean what he was seeing was real, and some part of him, the part that had told himself for 2 years that his family would come around. That time was the answer, that love was enough of a bridge, was not ready for what he was seeing to be real. His mother's voice had already faded. The room had already settled back into the particular quiet of people pretending nothing had happened. Amara was seated at the far end of the table, the far end, not beside his empty chair, not near the elders, but as far from the center of the family as a person could be placed without being asked to eat in another room, and she was holding her fork with the careful steadiness of someone who had made a decision not to shake. He knew that steadiness. He had watched her practice it without knowing she was practicing it, across 100 dinners and social obligations and moments where someone had said something just slightly wrong. He had watched her absorb it and breathe through it and keep moving, and he had told himself she was fine because she never said she wasn't. He had been a coward. He understood that now with a clarity that felt almost physical, like something pressing hard against his sternum. Min-jun appeared at his shoulder. His second-in-command had followed him from the car and now stood just behind him in the corridor, close enough to speak quietly. "Sir, do you want me to—" "No." Jae-hyun didn't look at him. "Wait outside." "Sir, if you go in there right now, you're going to—" "Min-jun." His voice was very quiet. "Wait outside." A pause. Then the sound of footsteps retreating down the corridor. Jae-hyun stayed in the doorway. He watched Ji-yeon cross the room toward Amara with a wine glass and the expression she wore when she had already decided how a conversation was going to end. He watched his sister stop beside his wife's chair. He couldn't hear the words at this distance, only the shape of them, the cadence. He watched Amara's face during the exchange, still, contained, and he watched the moment where something moved behind her eyes that she immediately pushed back down, and Ji-yeon walked away smiling the way she always smiled when she believed she'd won something. His jaw was hurting. He realized he'd been clenching it. He had come home 3 hours earlier than expected because Min-jun had resolved the Busan situation with a single phone call, a solution so obvious that Jae-hyun had felt briefly foolish for not seeing it immediately, and then had felt something else entirely when he understood it meant he could be here. He had told the driver to go faster. He had told himself he was being irrational, that Amara was fine, that one evening was manageable. He stood in the doorway and watched his family manage her. Then his mother spoke. He knew his mother's voice at any volume and in any register. He heard it now, measured, formal, unhurried, and he watched the ripple move through the room the way ripples always did when Choi Soon-yi decided to use her voice as a weapon. He saw the housekeeper freeze. He saw the young cousin, Ha-yoon, who was 20 and had always been kinder than the rest of them, lean toward Amara and say something in a voice too low to carry. He saw Amara's face during and after it. He had seen Amara negotiate with a regional warlord in South Sudan and come out with a signed agreement and her dignity intact. He had seen her stand in front of a collapsed school building in Guatemala and direct rescue operations for 11 hours without sleeping. He had watched her talk a grieving father down from a ledge in Nairobi, voice steady, eyes steady, every part of her steady, because she understood that her steadiness was what other people needed. She was doing it now. She was being steady for a room full of people who wanted to see her crack, and she was doing it alone, because he had sent her here alone. He took one breath. Then he stepped back from the doorway, moved down the corridor to the small side room that functioned as a staging area for the household staff, and stood there for a moment in the dark, with his hands flat on a table. He needed 60 seconds, just 60 seconds, because if he walked into that room right now with what was currently running through him, he would say things in a way that broke every relationship in that family permanently. And while part of him felt that was exactly what those relationships deserved, he was not his impulses. He had spent his entire adult life learning not to be his impulses. 55 seconds. 50. He breathed. He thought about what he wanted. Not what he felt. What he wanted. What the outcome needed to be. Amara needed to know he had seen it. His family needed to understand there would be consequences. And he needed to do both things in a way that nobody in that room could later reframe as an overreaction. 60 seconds. He walked back to the doorway. He stepped through it. He walked into the banquet hall. The room noticed him, the way rooms always notice when someone enters who carries authority. Not immediately, not all at once, but in a wave. A cousin looked up, then an uncle. Then the sound levels shifted, conversations fading to murmurs, fading to silence. Because Kang Jae-hyun was not supposed to be here, and he was here, and his face was doing something that nobody in the room had seen it do before. He walked the length of the table without looking at anyone. Straight down the center, past the elders, past his mother at the head, past every seated relative who turned to watch him pass. And he did not stop until he reached the far end where Amara was sitting with her fork in her hand and her expression perfectly composed. She looked up when he reached her. For just 1 second, 1/2 second, barely a flicker, something crossed her face. Not relief exactly. Something rawer than relief. The face of someone who has been holding a wall up alone for hours and just heard someone on the other side knock. Then she composed herself again. "You're back early," she said. "I am." He pulled out the chair beside her, the empty one, the one that belonged to no one, and sat down. He took her hand on top of the table, not hidden, not subtle. He placed her hand in his and left it there where everyone could see it. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for a moment. "I'm fine." "Amara." "I said I'm fine, Jay." He held her eyes. She held his. And in that silent exchange, in the language that 3 years of marriage had built between them, she told him everything she wasn't saying out loud. She told him she was not fine. She told him she had not been fine for the entire evening. She told him she was furious at him, or something adjacent to furious, because she had trusted him, and he had sent her here, and she had endured things that she should not have had to endure, and she was not going to say any of that right now because this was still his family's table, and she was still trying to protect him from a choice he might regret. He understood every word. He stood up. The chair made a sound when he pushed it back. Not dramatic, just the ordinary scrape of furniture on stone flooring. But in a room that had gone as quiet as this one, it sounded like something being announced. He didn't go to the head of the table. Not yet. He first moved to Amara's side and extended his hand, and she looked at it for a moment before taking it. He drew her to her feet. He led her, slowly, the length of the table, and everyone watched and no one spoke. He stopped at the empty chair beside the place that had been set for him. In the center, near the elders, near his mother, and he held it while Amara sat. Then he sat beside her. The silence stretched. His uncle, Kang Byung-soo, his father's older brother, a man of 67 who had been the family's senior voice since Jae-hyun's father died, cleared his throat. "Jae-hyun, we didn't expect you until I resolved the Busan matter early." Jae-hyun reached for the wine carafe and poured a glass for Amara, then for himself. His movements were unhurried. Unhurried was important. "I understand the evening has been going well." A pause. His uncle's eyes moved briefly toward Amara, then back. "It has been a fine gathering." "Good." Jae-hyun picked up his wine glass. He turned and looked at his mother. Choi Soon-yi was watching him from the head of the table with an expression that was not quite readable. She had a talent for that, for making her face a surface that gave nothing away while her eyes did the work. He had inherited that talent from her. He knew exactly how to read it. She wasn't surprised he was here, but she was calculating. "You're home," she said. "I am." "You should eat. You've been traveling." "In a moment." He set his wine glass down. "I'd like to speak first." "Jae-hyun," his uncle began. "Uncle, I'm going to ask you to let me finish." His voice didn't change. It stayed exactly where it was, level, unhurried, completely certain of itself. "What I have to say involves the whole family, so it makes sense to say it now while everyone is together." The room had the quality of held breath. Even the housekeeper had gone motionless near the wall. Ji-yeon, seated 3 chairs to the right, raised her wine glass to her lips with studied casualness. She was performing, not caring. He could see her performing it. "I came home early," Jae-hyun said, "and I stood in the corridor outside those doors for some time before I entered this room." He didn't look at Ji-yeon yet. He didn't look at the aunts. He kept his eyes on the table, on the middle distance, and kept his voice exactly where it was. I want the people in this room to think for a moment about what that means, about what I may have heard, and about what I may have seen. The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before. This one had weight. His mother spoke. Jae-hyun, this is neither the time nor— Mother, he looked at her. I'm going to say this once. Something moved through Choi Soon-yi's face. He watched it move through. She said nothing. My wife, Jae-hyun said, and even saying those two words with the full deliberateness he gave them seemed to shift the atmosphere in the room, was invited to this gathering as a member of this family. She came without me because I had an obligation elsewhere, and because I asked her to come. And in the time that I was gone— He paused, and now he looked at Ji-yeon, who had gone very still with the wineglass still held halfway to her mouth. She was seated as far from the family as the room allowed. She was spoken to in ways I would not permit if I had been present, and she was told by the matriarch of this family— and now he looked at his mother, directly, without softening it— that she does not belong here. Choi Soon-yi's expression tightened. I said no such— You said that the Kong name has survived 6 generations through the preservation of what it means to be a Kong. His voice still hadn't risen. That was the hardest part, keeping it exactly where it was. And that some traditions cannot be bent no matter how much someone wants to belong to something they were not born into. I heard you, Mother. I was standing in the doorway. The room was completely silent. Amara beside him had not moved. He could feel her beside him, could feel the particular tension in her, the way you can feel the tension in someone you have slept beside for 3 years, through the air between you. She was sitting perfectly straight. She had not reached for his arm. She was giving him the space to do this. He loved her for that. He also knew that the self-containment she was performing right now was costing her, and that knowledge was sitting in his chest like a burning coal. Ji-yeon broke first. That was not a surprise. Ji-yeon had always been the one whose feelings outran her judgment. Oh, please, she set her wineglass down. You heard things out of context. You always do this. You come in at the end of something and decide you understand everything. Ji-yeon. No. She pushed her chair back slightly, a gesture that was almost standing without quite being standing. I'm tired of this. I am tired of being made to feel like the villain because I have opinions about who is appropriate for this family. I am allowed to have opinions. You had a conversation with my wife during this meal. His voice was still level. Sit down and tell me what was said. It was nothing. Ji-yeon, sit down. Tell me what was said. She looked at him. He looked at her. His younger sister had beautiful, expressive eyes, and she had never once in her life been able to hide what was behind them. He could see the calculation running. How much did he see? How much did he hear? What could be minimized? I was checking on her, Ji-yeon said. I was being hospitable. Sit down, he said. She sat. Try again. Her jaw set. I told her that outside guests sometimes find these gatherings uncomfortable. That's all. She's not an outside guest. She is my wife. He felt something give slightly in his voice on those words. Not breaking, but something thinning. He reined it back. She is my wife, Ji-yeon. You have never once tried to understand that. You have never once tried to know her. And every time I have looked the other way to preserve your relationship with me, I have made it easier for you to keep doing this. Ji-yeon's eyes were bright. She doesn't belong here, she said, very quietly. I know you don't want to hear it, but someone in this family has to— Stop. Jae, look at us. She gestured at the table, at the family, the gesture encompassing all of it, the long room, the ancestral photographs, the tradition of the evening. This is what we are. This is what we have always been. You can't just bring someone in from outside and decide that someone from outside. He repeated those words very carefully. She's been my wife for 3 years. She sits across from me every morning. She knows your birthday and your allergies and the name of the dog you had when you were 7 years old. But she's someone from outside. Ji-yeon said nothing. What does inside look like, Ji-yeon? Tell me. What does someone have to do to be considered inside? Silence. Because I'd like to know, he said. I would genuinely like to know what she could have done differently tonight to be inside. His uncle tried to intervene. Kang Byung-soo was a man who operated through mediation. It was the instinct of someone who had spent 40 years navigating family disputes and organizational conflicts. and he placed both palms on the table in the gesture that meant, let us find common ground. Jae-hyun, Ji-yeon, this is a family matter. We can discuss this. We are discussing it, Jae-hyun said. Privately, not at the ancestral table, not in front of Amara? He turned to look at his uncle. You mean we shouldn't say these things in front of the woman we've been saying them about all evening? Byung-soo's expression shifted. That is not what I... She has been sitting at this table for 3 hours. She has been spoken to in ways I cannot repeat without my voice doing something I don't want it to do right now. And now the suggestion is that the appropriate response is to discuss this somewhere she's not. He held his uncle's gaze. I'm going to decline that suggestion. Byung-soo sat back. Across the table, Mrs. Park, the aunt with the sharp face and the comment about Amara's hair, had developed a sudden intense interest in her dinner plate. Jae-hyun looked at her. He let the silence hold for a moment. Mrs. Park. His voice was almost gentle. I understand you had some remarks this evening about my wife's appearance. The table seemed to contract. Mrs. Park looked up. I'm sure I don't know what you're... In Korean, at the table. Directed at her, not to her. He tilted his head slightly. She understood more than you assumed she did. Mrs. Park's face had gone the particular mottled color of someone whose carefully maintained composure is developing cracks. It was simply, I know what it was. It was a private remark, made at a table where 17 people were sitting. He let that sit for a moment. Explain to me the part where that's private. She did not explain it. Amara put her hand on his arm. He stopped. He looked at her. Her expression was composed. Her eyes were not quite composed. He could see what was behind them, that burning, tired, complex thing. But her expression was calm, and she was looking at him with the specific look that meant, I need you to stop for a second. Jay? Her voice was low. He said nothing. You don't have to do this here, she said. Yes. He turned his hand over and took hers. I do. You're going to say things you can't take back. I know. She looked at him steadily. And you're okay with that. He thought about her sitting at the far end of that table for 3 hours. He thought about her picking up her fork after his mother spoke. He thought about the knock of her steadiness against the wall she had been building all evening. Yes, he said. I'm okay with that. Something crossed her face. She pressed her lips together. She nodded once and turned her eyes back to the table. He stood. Choi Soon-hee spoke before he could. Enough! His mother's voice cut through the room with the clarity of someone who had controlled rooms for 62 years and was not prepared to lose control of this one. She was not loud. She never needed to be loud. Jae-hyun, sit down. You are making a spectacle of your family. My family? He said. Or yours? A pause. Her eyes sharpened. Excuse me? I have been asking myself that question for 2 years. He stood at the midpoint of the table now, not at either end, deliberately, because neither end belonged to him, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. This family, what does it owe her? What does it owe the woman I chose? You chose, his mother began. I chose her, he said, without consulting this table, without asking permission, because she is the person I want to spend my life beside, and I was under the belief that the people who raised me were capable of understanding what that means. Choi Soon-hee's chin came up. You are being disrespectful. I am being precise. He met her eyes. There is a difference. You taught me the difference. His mother's expression moved through something complicated. Pride, maybe, in spite of herself. She had taught him that. The precision, the controlled delivery, followed immediately by something harder. Amara is not. Do not, he said quietly, finish that sentence. She finished it anyway. His mother had never in her life left a sentence unfinished because someone told her not to. She is not one of us, Choi Soon-hee said, clearly, calmly, with the weight of someone stating a fact they believe to be immovable. And loving her does not change that. The room held its breath. Jae-hyun stood at the middle of the table between the head where his mother sat and the far end where Amara had been exiled for 3 hours. And he looked at the woman who had raised him and he said very quietly, in the voice he used when he meant every syllable with his entire body, Then you have made your choice, and I have made mine. He turned to Amara. He extended his hand. She looked at it. She looked at him. And then she took it. He began to move toward the door. Jae-hyun. His mother's voice cracked on the second syllable, just slightly, just enough. If you walk out of this room, you are walking away from everything this family has built. He stopped. He didn't turn around. Everything this family has built, he said to the door in front of him, will still be standing in the morning. The question is who will be standing beside it. He walked out of the room. Amara walked beside him. The doors swung shut behind them, and the sound of them closing echoed the length of the corridor, and neither of them looked back. And in the banquet hall behind those doors, the silence that followed was the kind that does not quickly fill. The silence of a room full of people suddenly confronted with the fact that something has ended, and nothing that came after it would look the same. The car was cold. Chae-hyun had told the driver to turn the heat on, and the driver had turned it on, and it still felt cold. The way spaces feel cold when the people inside them are carrying something that hasn't finished burning yet. Amara sat with her hands in her lap and watched the pine trees slide past the window on both sides, the headlights turning the road into a pale corridor through the dark, and she did not speak. He did not speak either. They had been in the car for 11 minutes. He knew because he had watched the dashboard clock without meaning to, the way you watch things when you're trying to give your brain something neutral to do while the rest of you processes something that is not neutral at all. She had not let go of his hand when they left the room. She had held it through the corridor and through the entrance hall and out the front door and down the steps and into the car. And then when the car door closed, she had released it, and he had felt the release the way you feel the end of something. He looked at her profile in the dark. Amara, I don't want to talk yet, she said. Not unkind, just honest. Okay. She stopped, exhaled slowly through her nose. I need to just sit here for a little while. Okay. The clock turned to 12 minutes. She turned her face away from the window and looked at the back of the seat in front of her. Her grandmother's earrings caught the light from outside, small flashes of gold at her jaw. She looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, a deeper exhaustion, the kind that accumulates over a long time and finally shows itself all at once when the pressure is removed. He wanted to touch her. He kept his hands in his lap. 14 minutes. The thing about tonight, she said, is that I've been here before. He waited. Not that room, not that family. She turned her head and looked at him, and her eyes in the dark were very direct. But that room, you understand what I mean. Yes. I have been in that room my entire life. She said it without self-pity, as a statement of fact, with the particular flatness of someone who has processed something so many times it no longer surprises them. Rooms where I'm too much or not enough, or the wrong kind of something, and I have a system for those rooms. I have, she paused, choosing her word, a method. I know. And I have spent 3 years watching you not understand why I need that method. She looked back at the window. I don't say that to punish you. I say it because it is true. He didn't argue with it. She was right, and arguing with the truth in this moment would be the worst thing he could do, and he knew it. I sent you there alone, he said. You did. I shouldn't have. She was quiet for a moment. No, you shouldn't have. The pine trees ended. The road widened into the outskirts of the city, streetlights appearing in intervals. The ordinary lit-up world resuming around them as though nothing had happened tonight, as though they were two people returning from an ordinary dinner. What happens now? She asked. And that was the question. That was the question he had been sitting with since the moment he stepped out of those doors. The question that had been waiting underneath everything. The confrontation, the walk out, the hand he had extended and she had taken. What happens now? He had made a declaration in front of every elder and relative his family contained. He had walked out of the ancestral banquet. He had planted a flag, and he had no idea what the ground looked like on the other side of it. I don't know yet, he said. She nodded slowly, not satisfied with that answer, but accepting it for now. They rode the rest of the way home in a silence that was different from the one in the banquet hall. Not hostile, not cold. The silence of two people who are still finding the shape of something that has just changed. The apartment was the way they had left it. Chae-hyun's tie draped over the back of a chair, Amara's coffee cup from that morning still on the counter, because neither of them had had time to put it in the sink. Ordinary things that looked strange now, the way ordinary things do after something has broken and been left on the table. Amara went to the kitchen and filled a glass with water, and stood at the counter drinking it with both hands wrapped around the glass. He stood at the edge of the room and watched her and tried to figure out what she needed from him right now. He was not always good at that. He knew he wasn't always good at it. He was better at solving problems than sitting with them, better at action than stillness. And she had told him that in the early part of their marriage, in the careful way she told him things that cost her something to say. You try to fix things before you understand what's broken. He had been working on that for 3 years. He was still working on it. She set the glass down. Go take care of whatever is going to need taking care of, she said. He frowned. Nothing needs... Jay? She turned to face him. Your phone has been vibrating since we got in the car. Minjun has called 3 times. Your mother has called twice. She met his eyes levelly. Go deal with it. That can wait. Can it? He opened his mouth, closed it. I'm not trying to get rid of you, she said, and her voice had gone quiet and direct in the way it did when she was saying something important without dressing it up. I'm tired. I need to wash this evening off of me and sleep. And you have a family crisis to manage, and you managing it from the hallway outside our bedroom is not going to help either of us. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her and looked at her face and tried to find the thing underneath the composure, the actual temperature of what she was feeling. Are you angry with me? He asked. She held his gaze for a long moment. Ask me again in a few days, she said. He nodded. He pressed his forehead briefly to hers, she let him, and then he stepped back. Lock the door, he said. Force of habit. Always do, she said. Force of hers. He left. Minjun was waiting in the car outside. That was the thing about Minjun. He was always where you needed him to be before you knew you needed him there, and he never made a production of it. He was 34 years old and had been with the organization for 11 years, and there was nobody in the structure that Jae-hyun trusted more completely, which was the reason he said things to Minjun in the car that he said to no one else. Tell me what's happening, Jae-hyun said as he got in. Your mother has called a family meeting. Minjun handed him his phone, his second phone, the organizational one, which had its own pattern of missed calls. Tomorrow morning, the ancestral house. Who's been notified? All senior family members, the uncles, your aunt Soo-jin, the park branch. A pause. And 3 of the organizational elders. Jae-hyun looked at him. The organizational elders. Yes, sir. He let that sit for a moment. The organizational elders were a separate body from the family, 3 men in their 70s who held advisory positions in the structure and whose opinions carried weight not through any official authority, but through the simple fact that they had been part of the organization longer than almost anyone alive. His father had consulted them. Their endorsement mattered. His mother had called them to a family meeting. That was not an accident. That was strategy. She moved fast, he said. She called within 20 minutes of you leaving the hall. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and thought. The thing about his mother, the thing he had known about Choi Soon-yi his entire life, was that she did not respond to conflict the way most people did. She did not get emotional. She got organized. A confrontation to her was not a wound. It was a problem. And problems had solutions, and solutions required coordination. The fact that she had already mobilized the senior family members and the organizational elders in under 20 minutes meant she had almost certainly been preparing for this possibility before tonight. She had anticipated that he might push back. She had a response ready. What else? He said. Minjun was quiet for a second in the particular way that meant there was something he wasn't sure how to deliver. Tell me. There's a document circulating, Minjun said carefully. Among the family. It started moving through private channels about an hour ago. We picked it up through one of the cousins who forwarded it to the wrong account. What kind of document? A financial summary. Minjun held out a tablet. Sir, I want to prepare you before you look at it. He took the tablet. He looked. The document was 4 pages. The heading was in formal Korean professional formatting, the kind of presentation you prepared in advance. It was a summary of organizational expenditures over the past 3 years, specifically expenditures that could be connected through a selective and carefully curated reading to Amara, her humanitarian organization's funding, some of which came through channels that ran adjacent to the Kong structure, travel costs, properties, charitable donations made in both their names to organizations she led. and it was framed with deliberate, meticulous precision as evidence that she had married into the family specifically to access its resources. He read it twice. The document was not made of lies. That was the part that was almost impressive in a sickening way. Every figure cited was real. Every connection drawn was technically accurate. It was constructed entirely from true things arranged to tell a false story, the most dangerous kind of document, because it couldn't be refuted by simply correcting facts. Someone had spent time on this. Someone had spent considerable time. Who prepared it? His voice was very even. We're not certain. The formatting suggests professional assistance, not family, not organizational. External. Someone was commissioned. How long ago? Minjun paused. Based on the metadata, the document was created approximately 6 weeks ago. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. 6 weeks ago. Before tonight. Before the banquet. Before the emergency call that had sent him to Busan and left Amara alone with his family. 6 weeks ago, someone in his family had commissioned a professional document designed to dismantle his marriage from the inside, and they had done it quietly, carefully, and with enough lead time that it was ready to deploy the moment he showed his hand. He opened his eyes. The Busan conflict, he said. Minjun's expression shifted, just slightly. Sir, tell me about the Busan conflict. His voice was still even, still unhurried, the way it got when something inside him went very cold. The conflict between the Park Lieutenant family and the… Was it real? A silence. Minjun. He turned to look at his second-in-command directly. Was the Busan conflict real, or was I sent there? Minjun looked at him with the expression of a man who has been carrying a question he didn't want to ask, and has just had it asked for him. I've been pulling the communication thread for the past 2 hours, he said quietly. The initial report came from a mid-level coordinator named Che, who has, it turns out, had 3 phone calls in the past month with a personal number registered to… Don't tell me yet. He held up one hand. He needed another second. Just one more second, because if Minjun said the name he was about to say, it would mean that the emergency that sent him to Busan was manufactured, that his absence from the banquet was not coincidental, that the entire evening, the seating, the escalation, the document ready to circulate the moment he walked out, was not an improvised retaliation. It was a plan that had been running for weeks while he went to work every day and came home to his wife and told himself his family would come around in time. Tell me, he said. The number is registered to a Lee Sung-won, Minjun said carefully. Who is the personal assistant to… My mother. Yes, sir. The city moved past the windows. Ordinary lights, ordinary streets, ordinary people living in the ordinary version of a night that had nothing in it like this one. He sat very still and watched it move past. His mother had manufactured the emergency that removed him from the banquet. She had planted the document to circulate through the family the moment he showed resistance. She had called the organizational elders within 20 minutes of his exit, which meant she had their numbers ready, which meant she had already prepared the call. She had run this operation the way she ran everything, cleanly, thoroughly, with enough preparation that by the time the thing was visible, it was already done. He thought about Amara sitting at the far end of that table. He thought about the cream envelope with the gold crest, the invitation his mother had sent. All family members are expected to attend. He thought about how perfectly timed it all was. The invitation, the emergency, the absence, the escalation, the document. He thought about the look on Amara's face when she said, "Ask me again in a few days," and he understood, with a clarity that felt like being hit, that the woman he had promised to protect had walked directly into something he had been unconsciously helping to construct through every year of looking the other way. The meeting tomorrow morning, he said. What is its stated purpose? A family discussion about the future direction of organizational leadership. Minjun paused. And a vote. A vote. On whether to formally recognize your marriage as a legitimate union under the terms of the family charter. He turned to look at Minjun. There is no such provision in the charter. There wasn't, Minjun said. An amendment was filed 6 weeks ago by 3 family members acting as co-signatories. He pulled up something on the tablet. Your uncle Byung-soo, your aunt Soo-jin, and my sister. Minjun said nothing, which was answer enough. Ji-yeon. His younger sister, who had grown up following him through the house and fallen asleep on his shoulder, watching movies, and called him 3 times when her first relationship ended because she didn't know who else to call. Ji Yan, who had looked him in the eye tonight at that table and told him Amara didn't belong here. Ji Yan, who had signed her name to a document 6 weeks ago that would give the family the mechanism to formally dissolve his marriage if the vote went against him. He closed the tablet. "What's the count?" he asked. "If the vote happens tomorrow, what's the count?" Minjun's jaw moved slightly. "Current estimate, 7 in favor of invalidation, 4 opposed, 3 undecided. 14 votes total? 15. Your vote is included but carries only standard weight under the amendment's terms. My vote on my own marriage carries standard weight. That is what the amendment specifies." He sat back against the seat. He looked at the roof of the car. He breathed in, slowly, through his nose. They had thought of everything. They had counted the votes before triggering the sequence. They had filed the legal mechanism, staged the emergency, prepared the evidence document, and scheduled the meeting. If he had walked out of that banquet hall furious and reactionary and not thinking clearly, if he had said something in that room that alienated the undecided members, the vote tomorrow morning might already be over. He thought about what he had said in that room. He ran back through it. He had been controlled. He had been precise. He had made declarations, but he had not threatened. He had not said anything that could be used to paint him as unstable or impulsive to the 3 undecided members who would decide everything tomorrow. That was, he realized, the only thing that had gone right. "Who are the 3 undecideds?" he said. "Elder Choi Wan-sik, your cousin Min Seo, and—" Minjun hesitated. "Who?" "Your father's brother, Kang Dae-hyun." He was quiet for a moment. His father's brother was 81 years old and had not spoken more than 40 words to him in the past decade. He was also the senior-most member of the family bloodline, which under the original charter, not the amended version, the original one, gave his opinion precedence over any vote count. "Does my uncle know about the amendment?" Jae-hyun asked. "Unknown. Find out tonight." "It's past midnight. Find out tonight, Minjun." A pause. "Yes, sir." He closed his eyes again. Not for calm this time, just because he needed to not look at anything for a moment. He needed to not see the city moving past the window, or Minjun's careful face, or the glow of the tablet with its document full of true things arranged to destroy something. He needed to think about Amara. Upstairs in the apartment, washing the evening off of her the way she had said she needed to. Not knowing that the evening had been a mechanism. Not knowing that while she was sitting at the far end of that table enduring 3 hours of orchestrated cruelty, the people delivering it were also positioning the documents and counting the votes and scheduling the meeting that would, if it ran without interference, give them the legal framework to declare her marriage invalid within the organizational structure. She thought tonight had been about prejudice. It had been about prejudice, yes, but it had also been about something worse than prejudice. Prejudice was feeling. What his mother had built was architecture. He opened his eyes. "There is one more thing," Minjun said. He looked at him. "The document that's circulating." Minjun's voice had shifted, gone slightly more careful. "There is a section we didn't discuss, on pages 3 and 4. He picked up the tablet. He turned to page 3. It was about the South Sudan project. Amara's organization had worked in South Sudan for 3 years. Clean water infrastructure, school reconstruction, a medical supply chain that she had spent 18 months building from nothing. He knew this work intimately because he had talked with her about it across hundreds of dinners and late nights and early mornings, had listened to her describe the logistics with the particular intensity of someone who cared about logistics, not because they were interesting, but because lives depended on getting them right. The document section on South Sudan did not describe humanitarian work. It described a funding channel, specifically a financial flow from a Kang subsidiary through a shell entity into a foundation registered in Amara's name, which then, according to the document's framing, had been used to establish relationships with regional officials whose cooperation provided the Kang organization with unmonitored movement corridors through 3 East African border regions. He read it 3 times. Each time he read it, it said the same thing: that Amara's humanitarian work in South Sudan was not what it appeared to be. That the infrastructure she had built had been used, knowingly or unknowingly, the document was careful not to specify, as a mechanism for organizational expansion into new territory. He looked up from the tablet. "Is this true?" he asked. Minjun was quiet for too long. Minjun. His voice had gone somewhere he almost didn't recognize. "Is any part of this true?" "The funding channel is real," Minjun said carefully. "The subsidiary, the shell entity, the flow, that structure exists. It was established 18 months ago by," he paused, "by the Organizational Finance Division." "On whose authorization?" Another pause. "The authorization signature is yours, sir." He stared at him. "It's a standard subsidiary expansion document. It was included in a package of 14 financial instruments you signed in March of last year. It's unlikely you read the specific instrument in detail. The package was presented as routine infrastructure expansion, and the shell entity was named in a way that did not immediately indicate. Did Amara know? His voice had gone flat and cold. There is no evidence she knew. The foundation registered in her name was established without her direct involvement. It's a charitable registration that uses her name as the founding humanitarian contact, which is standard for her organization's project structure. She almost certainly would not have reviewed the financial backend. Almost certainly. There is no evidence she knew, Minjun repeated, with emphasis this time. But, he stopped. Say it. But the document doesn't require proof that she knew. It only requires the suggestion. And once that suggestion is in the room tomorrow morning, in front of the organizational elders and the family members who are already inclined to vote against the marriage. Minjun stopped again. He didn't need Minjun to finish. He understood what the room would look like tomorrow morning. He understood what the suggestion would do even without proof. He understood that his mother had not built a case. She had built a cloud, the kind of cloud that doesn't have to contain anything specific to darken everything underneath it. Amara's name, his signature. A financial structure neither of them had consciously created, and a room full of people already motivated to believe the worst interpretation of both. He looked out the window. He had spent his adult life as a man who solved problems. He had navigated organizational conflicts and territorial disputes and moments of genuine crisis with the particular skill set of someone who understood that leverage was information, and information was power, and power used without precision was just violence. He had built his entire leadership on the belief that he was the one who saw the full board. He had not seen this board. His mother had been playing a longer game than he had, and she had been playing it in the space he'd refused to look at directly, the space between his wife and his family, the space he had told himself would resolve itself through time and patience and love. She had built a trap in that space, brick by brick, over 6 weeks, while he looked away. And tomorrow morning, at the ancestral house, in front of the people who held the organizational structure's future in their collective vote, she was going to spring it. He had 12 hours. 12 hours to find Kang Dae-hyun and understand what the oldest living member of the family bloodline knew and didn't know about what his niece had done. 12 hours to untangle a financial document that bore his own signature from a legitimate subsidiary package and prove the shell entity was not what the family document implied. 12 hours to find the 3 undecided votes and move at least 2 of them before morning. And somewhere in those 12 hours, he was going to have to decide what to tell Amara. Because she was upstairs in their apartment believing that what happened tonight was over, that he had walked her out of that room and the worst of it was behind them, that tomorrow would be the morning after a very hard evening and that they would begin building from it. She did not know about the vote. She did not know about the document with her name in it. She did not know that 6 weeks of preparation had gone into the single worst night of her marriage, or that the worst was not yet here. He sat in the car outside their building and looked up at the light in the window of their apartment. Her light. She had left the bedroom light on. And he felt something he did not have a clean word for. A compound thing made of love and guilt and cold fear, and the particular grief of understanding that protecting someone and deceiving them can sometimes look, from a distance, like the same act. He needed to tell her. He could not tell her yet. Not until he knew whether there was something to tell her that came with a solution attached, because telling her without the solution meant watching her look at him across the kitchen the way she had looked at that banquet room, with the full knowledge of what was happening and no power to stop it. And he was not willing to put her there. He was also, he admitted to himself in the silence of the car, afraid. Afraid of what her face would do when she understood that her name was in a document designed to destroy them. Afraid that the question he had asked her, "Are you angry with me?" would find its true answer in that moment, and that the answer would be larger and more permanent than anything either of them could fix. The light was still on upstairs. He reached for the door handle, stopped, reached for his phone instead and dialed a number he had not dialed in 2 years. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, old and rough with sleep. "Who is calling at this hour?" "Uncle," Jae-hyun said. "It's me. I need to speak with you." A pause. Then, "I was wondering when you would call." Something in Jae-hyun's chest moved. Not relief. Nothing was close to relief yet, but something. The sound of a door that might not be fully closed. "You know," Jae-hyun said. Not a question. "I know enough," said Kang Dae-hyun. His voice was steady for a man woken past midnight, steady in the way of someone who had been awake already, waiting. "Come to me tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Come alone," his uncle said. And Jae-hyun, another pause, longer, carrying the weight of something that had been held for a long time. "Whatever you need to prove that your wife is not what they are saying she is. Because the men in that room tomorrow will not give you a second chance to make your argument." The line went quiet. Jae-hyun sat for one more second, looking up at the light in the window. Then he told the driver to go. Part 4 của kịch bản điện ảnh này được triển khai với dung lượng viết đủ 4.500 is. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của Part 3. Trọng tâm tuyệt đối là cao trào bùng nổ, the peak of action and stakes. Mọi mâu thuẫn từ các phần trước giờ đây hội tụ thành một cuộc đối đầu trực diện, không khoan nhượng. Nhịp điệu kịch bản phải cực kỳ dồn dập, căng thẳng đến mức nghẹt thở. Duy trì giọng văn mỹ thô ráp, tập trung vào những chi tiết bản năng, tiếng tim đập, sự đau đớn thể xác, mồ hôi hòa lẫn máu và sự quyết liệt trong ánh mắt. Nhân vật phải thực hiện những lựa chọn liều lĩnh nhất, chấp nhận đánh đổi mọi thứ để đạt được mục tiêu. Hội thoại trong phần này cần gãy gọn, sắc bén, đôi khi là những tiếng hét hoặc những lời nói đứt quãng vì kiệt sức, triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh hành động hoặc đối đầu tâm lý, scene by scene, tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Kết thúc Part 4 ở đỉnh điểm kịch tính. Ngay trước khi trận chiến cuối cùng ngã ngũ, hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết, nêu đắt giới hạn phản hồi. Hãy dừng lại ở một câu rạng rỡ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp. Chidan Bat Buok. Đây là một câu chuyện, điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng. Nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dùng giữa câu hay viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh, không mở rộng nồi rộng. Kang Dae-hyun lived in a house that smelled like old paper and pine resin and the particular stillness of a space that had not been altered in decades. He was 81 years old and he opened the door himself, which meant he had been standing at it, waiting, which meant the call had not surprised him as much as Jae-hyun had hoped. He was a small man. He had always been a small man, shorter than Jae-hyun's father had been, shorter than Jae-hyun by nearly a head, but he had the kind of presence that didn't require physical size. The presence of someone who had outlasted enough people and enough crises that the world had simply stopped arguing with him about whether he mattered. He stepped back from the door without a word, and Jae-hyun stepped inside. The study was lit by 2 lamps and a screen, an old desktop computer that looked absurd in the antique room, but Dae-hyun had always been like that, a man of traditional instincts who adopted modern tools without apology. On the screen was a document. Jae-hyun recognized the formatting before he could read the content. The same document. The 4-page financial summary with Amara's name in it. "Sit," Dae-hyun said. Jae-hyun sat. "How long have you had it?" Jae-hyun asked. 3 hours. The old man lowered himself into the chair behind the desk with the careful deliberateness of someone whose joints had stopped cooperating years ago, but who refused to let that show more than necessary. "It was sent to me at the same time as the others. Your mother assumed I would read it and draw the same conclusions." "Did you?" Dae-hyun looked at him with eyes that had watched 60 years of family politics unfold and had developed through that watching a flatness that was not unkindness but was something beyond surprise. "I drew the conclusion that my niece spent 6 weeks building a legal mechanism to dissolve her son's marriage and triggered it tonight with professional precision." He folded his hands on the desk. "That tells me something about your mother. It tells me very little about your wife." Something loosened very slightly in Jae-hyun's chest. Just slightly. "Tell me about the woman," Dae-hyun said. "Not what the document says. Tell me who she is." So he did. He sat in his great-uncle's study past midnight, and he talked about Amara Bennett the way he rarely let himself talk about her to anyone, not as his wife in the political sense, not as the woman his family refused to accept, but as herself. The way she argued about logistics. The way she read reports on her tablet with her feet tucked under her and corrected figures in the margins with a red pen. The way she had learned 20 words of Korean in the first 6 months of their marriage, not for his family, but for him, because she wanted to be able to say small things to him in his first language. The way she had sat at that banquet table for 3 hours and endured things that would have broken the composure of most people he knew, and had kept her fork in her hand, and had not given his family the satisfaction of watching her fracture. Dae-hyun listened without interrupting. When Jae-hyun finished, the old man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Show me what you brought." Jae-hyun opened his bag. He had stopped at the office on the way here, 20 minutes, Min-jun on the phone the entire time, pulling files. He had the original subsidiary expansion package from March, all 14 instruments, with the specific shell entity document flagged. He had the charitable registration for the South Sudan Foundation, which was, as Min-jun had confirmed, a standard humanitarian project registration that used Amara's name as founding contact without requiring her direct financial oversight. He had 3 years of Amara's organizational audits, independently verified, showing clean financials throughout. And he had, because Min-jun had found it in 40 minutes of targeted searching, an email chain from 11 months ago between the Organizational Finance Division's mid-level director and a name that appeared nowhere in the official structure but whose account was traceable, through 2 layers of forwarding, to the same personal assistant whose number had appeared in the Busan coordinator's call log. Someone in his own finance division had been reporting to his mother's office for at least a year. He laid it all on the desk. Dae-hyun put on reading glasses and looked at it methodically. He did not rush. He turned pages with the deliberate care of someone for whom rushing had become a choice rather than a reflex. And he read. And Jae-hyun sat across from him and listened to the house settle around them and tried to hold himself still. At 2:17 in the morning, Dae-hyun took his glasses off. "The charter amendment," he said. "Your mother filed it with 3 co-signatories." "Yes." "Under the original charter, the one your grandfather wrote, an amendment to the family governance structure requires a 2/3 majority of bloodline members over the age of 60. He set the glasses on the desk. "There are currently 9 such members." Jae-hyun looked at him. He had not known the specific threshold. He had not looked at the original charter in years. 6 votes required, Dae-hyun said. "Your mother has 3 signatories. She needs 3 more from the meeting tomorrow." He paused. "The amendment is not yet valid. It was filed, but it has not yet been ratified. The meeting tomorrow is the ratification." "Yes." "If she gets 6 votes at the meeting, the amendment passes and the mechanism for the marriage vote becomes structurally legitimate." The old man's eyes were steady. "If she does not get 6 votes, the amendment fails. The family charter remains as your grandfather wrote it, and there is no legitimate mechanism for a vote on your marriage." Jae-hyun sat forward. "How many bloodline members over 60 will be at tomorrow's meeting?" 8. "I am the 9th, and I will also be there." A pause. "Your mother has 3. She needs 3 more from the remaining 5. "Who are the 5? Dae-hyun named them. Jae-hyun knew all of them. 2 uncles on his father's side, 2 aunts from the extended Park branch who had married into the family bloodline, and a cousin in his late 60s who had been peripheral to family politics for most of his adult life. "I need to talk to them tonight," Jae-hyun said. "It is 2:30 in the morning." "I know what time it is." Dae-hyun looked at him for a moment. Then something moved in the old man's face, not quite a smile, but something adjacent. The expression of someone who recognizes a quality they respect, even when it's inconvenient. "Your father was the same way," he said. "He could not wait either." He said it without sentiment, just observation, and Jae-hyun filed it away in the part of himself where things about his father went, the part he didn't open often, because opening it cost something, and tonight he could not afford costs. "Will you come?" Jae-hyun asked. "I will be at the meeting in the morning," Dae-hyun said. "That is where my presence will matter." He picked up one of the documents from the desk, the email chain, the one connecting the finance director to his mother's office, and looked at it once more. "Take this with you. Show it to no one tonight. Show it in the room tomorrow, with me present, where it cannot be dismissed as something you manufactured after the fact." "And the 3 votes?" 2, Daehyun said. You need 2. I will be the third. Jaehyun stood. He gathered the documents. At the door he stopped. Uncle. He turned. Did you know? Before tonight. Did you know what she was planning? Daehyun was quiet for a moment. I suspected, he said finally. I did not act on the suspicion because I told myself it would not go this far. A pause. The particular pause of someone acknowledging a failure without dramatizing it. I was wrong, and that is a mistake I will correct tomorrow. Jaehyun nodded. He left. He called the first uncle from the car. Byung-chul, his father's younger brother, 71, a man who had stayed carefully neutral in every family dispute for the past 30 years because neutrality was the way he had survived them. The phone rang 8 times before it picked up. Who? Uncle Byung-chul. It's Jaehyun. I need 20 minutes. A long pause, sleep-heavy breathing. Then, now? Now. Another pause. Come to the back gate. The second uncle, Young-pil, 64, the youngest of the bloodline members who qualified under the charter threshold, did not pick up the first call, or the second. On the third call, a woman's voice answered, his wife, drowsy and irritated, and said her husband was not available. Tell him Jaehyun needs him to look at something before the morning meeting, he said. Tell him it concerns the charter amendment. Tell him I will be outside in 10 minutes. He was outside in 10 minutes. Young-pil came to the door in a robe looking like a man who was being inconvenienced and was angry about it, and was also, underneath the anger, sufficiently curious that the curiosity was winning. Jaehyun showed him the original subsidiary document. He showed him the charitable registration. He showed him the email chain, not the whole chain, just enough of it, just the connective thread between the finance director and the office line. He kept it to 12 minutes, because Young-pil was the kind of man who started to resist when he felt his time was being taken from him, and 12 minutes was the edge of the window. Young-pil looked at the email chain for a long time. This says she ran the Busan call, he said. His voice was flat. He meant Jaehyun's mother. It says someone in her office coordinated with the Busan coordinator, yes. To remove you from the banquet. That is the most reasonable interpretation. Young-pil looked up. Does Sun-yi know you have this? She will in the morning. The older man looked back at the document. Something was moving behind his eyes, calculation, or something more personal. Jaehyun waited. I have 3 grandchildren, Young-pil said finally, not looking up. Jaehyun said nothing because he understood this was not a non sequitur. This was the man working his way towards something. They are good children, Young-pil said. The oldest will come into the organization in 4 years. Maybe 5. He set the document down. I would like the organization they enter to be one where the man at the top is the man at the top, not the man at the top's mother. He looked at Jaehyun directly. I will be at the meeting, he said. I will not vote for the amendment. The drive back to the apartment took 19 minutes, and Jaehyun used all of them. He had 2 votes. Daehyun had promised a third. That was 3 votes against ratification, which with his mother's 3 in favor meant the remaining 2 uncles and the Park Branch aunts and the peripheral cousin would determine whether the amendment passed or failed, and he did not have time before morning to reach all of them. And even if he did, showing up at people's doors at 3 in the morning with documents had a point of diminishing returns. What he had done tonight was enough or it wasn't. He would know in the morning. But the morning was 6 hours away, and he was in the car outside his building again, looking up at the window, and the light was off now. Amara was asleep. He went upstairs. He moved quietly through the apartment, set his bag by the door, went to the kitchen and drank water standing at the counter in the dark, the same way she had done it hours ago, and wondered if this was what it always came to, both of them standing alone at the same counter at different hours, holding the same glass, carrying different versions of the same impossible weight. He had made a decision on the drive home. He would tell her in the morning, before the meeting. Not everything, not the parts he didn't have clean answers to yet, but enough. He would tell her about the vote. He would tell her about the document with her name in it. He would tell her that tonight had not been what she thought it was. He owed her that. He owed her the truth before she spent the morning believing the hard part was over. He went to the bedroom door. She was asleep, her breathing slow and even, one arm across the other side of the bed, the side where he would have been if he had come home normally, like a normal evening, like a man who had not spent the night building a counter-strategy against his own mother's organizational assault. He did not wake her. He went back to the study and sat at his desk and worked through the rest of the night. At 5:47 in the morning, Amara appeared in the study doorway. She was in the clothes she wore to sleep, an oversized shirt, bare feet, and her hair was down from the way she'd put it up the night before, loose around her face. She looked at him at the desk, at the documents spread across it, at the coffee cup that had been refilled twice and was now half empty again. She looked at all of it, and her face did a thing, a settling, a tightening, the face of someone who has walked into a room and understood immediately that what they expected the morning to be is not what the morning is. "You didn't sleep," she said. "No." She came into the room. She did not sit. She stood on the other side of the desk and looked at the documents, and he watched her eyes move across them, quick and intelligent, reading what she could read and clocking what she couldn't. "Tell me," she said. So he told her. He did it the way he had decided, in order, without minimizing, without the hedging he'd been tempted to use. He told her about Minjun's call in the car. He told her about the document with her name in it. He told her about the Busan call and what it meant, that the emergency had been manufactured, that she had been sent into that room alone on purpose. He told her about the charter amendment and the vote scheduled for this morning. He watched her face while he told her. She stood perfectly still. Her expression did not break or crack or shift into anything demonstrative. It moved through things. He could see it moving through things. But she kept the movement internal, controlled, the way she always controlled the things that hit her hardest. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The document," she said. "The one with my foundation's name in it." "Yes, you have proof that I didn't know. The registration structure makes it clear you weren't involved in the financial back-end. But they're not going to lead with the proof." Her voice was level. "They're going to lead with the suggestion and let it sit in the room." "Yes." She nodded slowly. She pulled out the chair across from his desk, the one Minjun usually sat in, and she sat down. She put her elbows on the desk and her face in her hands, and for about 5 seconds she stayed like that. And he let her, because those 5 seconds were the first moment all night where she hadn't been performing composure for someone. Then she came back up. Her eyes were dry, clear, tired in a way that went all the way down. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked at her. "Amara, don't." She shook her head slightly. "Don't do the thing where you ask me how I am. I'm not—" She exhaled. "I need to be useful right now. Tell me what you need." He told her. He told her about the meeting, the 8 bloodline votes, the 2 he'd secured overnight, Daehyun's commitment, the remaining 5 he hadn't reached. He told her about the email chain and how Daehyun had said to deploy it in the room with witnesses present, so it couldn't be dismissed. She listened. Her eyes were moving the way they moved when she was working, quick, analytical, building something. "The 2 Park Branch aunts," she said. "Do you know them?" "Not well. They married into the bloodline. They're not close to the central family. So they don't have a personal stake in your mother's position." "No." "Then what they care about is the organization's stability." She sat back. "If the amendment passes and you're seen as someone whose leadership is being managed by his mother's interference, that's an organizational instability. It's a question mark over who's actually in charge." He looked at her. "That's the argument for the aunts," she said, "not the marriage. The leadership question." He was quiet for a moment. "That's correct? Can you reach them before the meeting?" He looked at the clock. 6:12. The meeting was at 9. "Yes," he said. She stood. "Then go." She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. "I'm coming to the meeting." He went very still. "Amara, I'm coming." Her voice was not raised, but it had a quality that closed down argument. "They built this whole thing around my name and my absence. I am not going to sit in this apartment while you fight it without me. It will be difficult. Jae-hyun." She said his full name, and the way she said it contained everything. 3 years of marriage, and the banquet table, and the cream envelope, and 5 seconds with her face in her hands and all the rest of it. "I have been making myself smaller to protect your relationship with your family for 2 years. I am done making myself smaller. I am coming to the meeting." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. The ancestral mansion in morning light looked different than it did at night. Less gold, more gray, the stone visible beneath the lighting, the pine trees along the drive stripped of their nighttime drama. Tae-hyun's car arrived at 8:52, 8 minutes before the scheduled meeting, and both Park Branch aunts, whom he had reached at 7:15 and spoken with for 40 minutes combined, making the argument Amara had identified with precision, were already inside. He did not know how they were going to vote. He had told them the truth and made the argument and left it with them. That was all he could do. He and Amara walked in together. The meeting room was the formal study on the second floor, a different room from last night's banquet hall, smaller and more austere, the kind of room that had hosted family decisions for decades. There was a long table. There were chairs. There were 8 people already seated when he entered, and every face turned. His mother was at the head of the table. Choi Soon-yi looked at him when he walked in. Then she looked at Amara, and something moved through her face that was not quite surprise. She had prepared for most things, but perhaps not for this. And then it was gone, replaced by the controlled surface. Jae-hyun held the door for Amara. She walked in first. She did not look at his mother. She walked to the side of the room and stood there, straight-backed, hands at her sides, and did not sit, because she had not been offered a seat, and she was not going to ask for one. Ji-yeon was in the corner of the room. She looked at Amara and then looked away. And in that looking away there was something that might have been the first honest shame she had shown since any of this started. Dae-hyun was seated to the left of the head of the table. He caught Jae-hyun's eye briefly. Nothing readable. Just present. Kang Byung-soo, the uncle who had tried to redirect last night, who was also one of the 3 amendment co-signatories, looked at Jae-hyun with an expression of a man who had woken up this morning regretting something and hadn't yet decided what to do about the regret. Jae-hyun sat. He placed his bag on the floor beside him. The email chain was inside. "We will begin," Choi Soon-yi said. She did not look at Amara again. It was the same dismissal as last night, the turned back, the deliberate non-acknowledgement, except that in this room with these stakes it was something more than dismissal. It was a statement of intent. She is not here. She does not exist in this room. What we decide here today, we decide about her in her absence, because I have decided she is absent. Chae-hyun looked at his mother. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to make sure everyone in this room understands what is actually being discussed today." Soon-yi's jaw tightened slightly. "The agenda has been distributed. I've read it." He put both hands flat on the table, a posture he had learned from watching her do it his entire life. The agenda describes a discussion of organizational leadership and family charter alignment. I want to name it more precisely. He looked around the table. "We are here to vote on whether to ratify an amendment that would give this family a mechanism to declare my marriage invalid. I want everyone present to be clear on that because the framing matters." A brief silence. One of the Park Branch aunts, a woman named Lee Hyun-ja, 67, whom he had spoken to for 18 minutes that morning, looked at the table with an expression he couldn't read. "The amendment has been filed correctly," Byung-soo began. "The amendment was filed 6 weeks ago," Jae-hyun said, "using 3 of the 9 required signatories, which means it has not yet been ratified, which means it is not yet in force, which means that every person in this room still has the full freedom to consider whether ratifying it is the correct decision." He paused. "I want that to be clear. Nobody is locked in." His mother looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding how much force to apply. She reached for the folder in front of her. "I think," she said, with the careful precision of someone laying down a card they have been holding for a long time, "that there are some matters this family should understand before it makes any decision. Matters regarding the character of the individuals involved." She opened the folder. She placed the 4-page financial summary in the center of the table. "This document," she began. "I've seen it," Jae-hyun said. "Then you understand?" "I understand that it is a document prepared by an external professional commissioned approximately 6 weeks ago, using selectively arranged accurate information to suggest that my wife married into this family for financial access." His voice was level and carrying, and he did not look at the document. He looked at the room. "I also understand that the foundation referenced in that document is a standard humanitarian project registration, that Amara was not involved in its financial structure, and that the subsidiary channel cited was included in a routine expansion package I signed in March, without the specific instrument being flagged for my review." "You signed it," Byung-soo said. Yes. I signed a 14-instrument package. One of those instruments was embedded within it in a way that was not transparent at the point of review. He reached into his bag. He took out the original package with the flagged instrument. He placed it on the table. This is the original. Date stamped, chain of custody intact. Then he took out the email chain. He placed it beside the package. This, he said, is a communication thread between a mid-level member of the organizational finance division and a contact number registered to this office. He tapped the document. It shows coordination between the finance division and my mother's personal staff over a period of 11 months. The room went very quiet. The coordination includes, he said, still in the same level voice, the structuring of the subsidiary instrument within the larger package, and a call made 4 days ago that initiated the Busan conflict report which removed me from last night's banquet. He looked at his mother. She was looking at the email chain. Her expression had not broken. He had not expected it to break. But something behind it had shifted, some internal calculation running at a speed he could almost see. That document, she said finally, is not verified. It will be verified, he said. I have already initiated the process. By end of week, there will be a complete audit trail. By end of week is not today. No. He met her eyes. It's not today. Which means you have a choice to make right now about whether you want to force a vote in this room this morning, knowing that by end of week, every person at this table will have access to a verified version of what I've just shown them. He paused. Or whether you want to table the meeting and let the audit run. His mother was very still. Ji-yeon made a sound from the corner, not quite a word, something that started as one. And then she stopped herself. Dae-hyun spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and completely certain of itself. The voice of a man who had outlasted 60 years of family politics and did not need volume to carry authority. I would like to hear from the other members before any vote is called, he said, beginning with the Park branch. Lee Hyun-ja looked up from the table. She looked at Jae-hyun. Then, for the first time, she looked at Amara. Amara was still standing at the side of the room. She had not moved since she walked in. She was not performing anything, not composure, not defiance, not dignity. She was simply standing there, in the gray morning light from the window, watching a room full of people decide her life. And her face was the face of someone who has decided that whatever happens next, they will meet it on their feet. Lee Hyun-ja looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Choi Soon-yi. I have a question, Lee Hyun-ja said, before I consider any vote. Her voice was careful and direct. The Busan coordination. If what Jae-hyun is saying is accurate, and I am not saying it is or isn't, then this family's organizational resources were used to stage a conflict in order to engineer a personal family outcome. She folded her hands. That concerns me significantly more than the marriage question. Because if leadership resources can be used that way once, they can be used that way again. She looked at Soon-yi. I would like that addressed. Soon-yi opened her mouth. Before she could speak, the door opened. Everyone turned. Min-jun stood in the doorway. He was breathing slightly harder than usual, which for Min-jun meant he had been moving fast. He looked at Jae-hyun, and his expression said, I have it. I apologize for the interruption, Min-jun said. He was looking at Jae-hyun and only at Jae-hyun. The audit has been expedited. The verification is complete. The room held completely still. Jae-hyun looked at his mother. She was looking at Min-jun. And for the first time in the entire span of this, the 6 weeks of preparation, the orchestrated banquet, the manufactured emergency, the document, the meeting, for the first time, Choi Soon-yi's face showed something that was not calculation. It showed the particular stillness of someone who has just understood that the thing they were certain would hold has not held. Jae-hyun stood. I'd like to propose, he said, in the same level voice he had used all morning, the voice that did not shake because shaking was not something he could afford, that we take 30 minutes before any vote is called. He looked around the table, at Dae-hyun, whose expression said yes, at Lee Hyun-ja, whose expression said, I'm listening, at Byung-chul, who had spent the night regretting something and was now looking at the email chain with the face of a man whose regret had just been given a very specific shape. 30 minutes to review the verified documentation. He looked at his mother last. And then, he said, we will see what this family decides to be. Choi Soon-yi looked at him across the table. Her son, who had her eyes and her precision and her talent for controlled delivery, and who was using every single thing she had taught him directly against her, and for 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then she looked away. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but everyone in the room saw it, and everyone in the room understood what it meant. And the silence that followed it was the silence of a tide turning in a space too enclosed to contain the 30 minutes Jae-hyun had requested did not feel like 30 minutes. They felt like the kind of time that exists outside of clocks. The stretched, pressurized time of a room full of people sitting with something that has changed the shape of everything and trying to figure out what the new shape means. Minjun had brought printed copies of the verified documentation, the full audit trail, chain of custody, the Busan coordination thread confirmed and time-stamped. And those copies now sat in front of every person at the table, and nobody was speaking, and the sound of pages turning was the loudest thing in the room. Amara had been given a chair. She had not asked for one. Daehyun had simply said, without looking at anyone in particular, "Bring a chair for Jaehyun's wife." And someone had brought one, and she had sat, and the sitting felt like a small thing, and was not a small thing. She sat beside Jaehyun, not behind him, not to the side. Beside, with their chairs close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and she read the documentation with him, even though she had already heard most of it in the study at 6 in the morning, because sitting here reading it was different from sitting in the study hearing it described. In the study, it had been information. In this room, it was evidence, laid out before the people who had spent 6 weeks building the thing it was dismantling. She read the section on the Busan coordination again. The time-stamped call log. The name of the coordinator. The number traced back. She read it, and then she set it down and she breathed slowly through her nose, and she looked at her hands in her lap. Jae-hyun put his hand over hers, under the table, where the room couldn't see it. She turned her hand over and held it. Across the table, Byung-soo had been reading the same page for 6 minutes. He had not turned it. He was a man who had co-signed an amendment 6 weeks ago and was now sitting with the verified evidence that the amendment had been built on an operation designed to deceive his nephew, and the thing moving through his face was not comfortable to watch. It was the face of a man reckoning with the distance between what he had believed he was doing and what he had actually been participating in. Lee Hyun-ja finished first. She set her copy down with a precision that was almost surgical, edges aligned, clean. And she looked at Choi Soon-yi. Soon-yi was the only person in the room who was not reading. She sat at the head of the table with her hands folded in front of her, and her copy of the documentation face down, and her expression doing the thing it always did, the controlled surface, the face that gave nothing away. But something underneath it was different now. The calculation was still running. Jae-hyun could see it running, had been watching his mother calculate his entire life and knew the look. But it was running against a set of numbers that no longer added up the way they had yesterday. She had planned for most things. She had not planned for Min-jun's audit completing overnight. She had not planned for Dae-hyun. She had not planned for Young-pil's quiet refusal at his front door at 3 in the morning. She had built a tight, carefully sequenced operation, and the sequence had slipped, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small places where tight plans always slip. The places where human beings make choices that weren't in the model. The 30 minutes ended. Dae-hyun did not wait for Soon-yi to speak first. He said simply and without preamble, "I believe we should address the amendment before anything else." The vote on the amendment took 4 minutes. Not because it was simple, nothing about the past 12 hours had been simple, but because by the time Dae-hyun called it, 3 of the 5 remaining bloodline members had already made their decisions in the way that decisions get made when people have been sitting with evidence for 30 minutes in a room that used to have a clear expected outcome and no longer does. Lee Hyun-ja voted against ratification. Her voice was level, and she gave no explanation, and nobody asked for one. The second Park Branch aunt, a quieter woman named Kim Soon-ae, who had said almost nothing all morning, voted against. She said it in a voice barely above a whisper, and then looked at the table and did not look up again. Byung-chul, who had driven to a back gate at 2:30 in the morning and spent 40 minutes with Jae-hyun looking at documents, voted against ratification. He said it like a man setting something down he had been carrying at the wrong angle, relieved and ashamed in equal measure. The peripheral cousin, a man named Kang Dae-sung, 68, who had been peripheral to family politics his whole adult life and who looked, Throughout the entire meeting, like someone who had shown up for a quarterly update and found himself inside something significantly larger, voted in favor. He did it quickly, without looking at anyone, and then looked at his hands. That left Young Pil. Young Pil had been watching the room all morning with the focused attention of a man running calculations. He had told Jae-hyun at his front door that he did not want the organization to be run by the man at the top's mother. He had said it with the clarity of someone identifying a structural problem rather than a personal one. Jae-hyun had taken that clarity at face value because there was nothing else to take. Young Pil voted against ratification. The amendment failed. 4 votes against, 2 in favor, with Dae-hyun's vote against making 5. Soon-yi's co-signatories, herself, Byung-soo, and Ji-yeon, who was not a bloodline vote holder and had attended as a family member only, had not been enough. The amendment that had been 6 weeks in the making, that had been the structural backbone of the entire operation, failed in 4 minutes on a Tuesday morning in September. Byung-soo had not voted. He sat with his copy of the documentation face down and did not raise his hand in either direction, and nobody pressed him, because everyone in the room understood that his silence was its own statement, the statement of a man who had been a co-signatory to something that had just been exposed in a way he had not anticipated, and who could not now vote to ratify it without putting his own name directly beside what the documentation showed. His abstention was not courage, but it was the closest thing to accountability he was capable of in that moment, and Jae-hyun noted it without mercy and without gratitude, because mercy and gratitude were both things he did not have available for his uncle right now. Dae-hyun announced the result in the same quiet, certain voice he had used all morning. The amendment was not ratified. The family charter remained as written. There was no legitimate mechanism for a vote on the validity of Jae-hyun's marriage. The matter was therefore closed. He said it like closing a book. And then the room was quiet. Choi Soon-yi stood up. She did it slowly, with the deliberateness of someone whose joints hurt, but who will never allow the hurt to show. And she smoothed the front of her jacket, and she looked at the table for a moment rather than at the room, and in that moment Jae-hyun watched his mother do something he had not seen her do in his entire adult life. She looked lost. Not broken. His mother was not a woman who broke, and he had known that his whole life. And the part of him that was still, underneath everything, her son, felt the ache of that knowledge. She was not going to break at this table. She was not going to cry or plead or show the room the internal architecture of what losing this felt like. She was going to stand up straight and walk out, because that was who she was, and some part of Jae-hyun respected it even now. But for 3 seconds, before she composed herself fully, she looked lost. And he saw it. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and she turned just slightly, and she looked at him. "You are your father's son," she said. He didn't know what she meant by it, whether it was an accusation or an acknowledgement or both, whether she was saying he had his father's loyalty or his father's stubbornness or his father's capacity to choose something over the family's expectation of him. He thought it might be all 3. He thought she might not know either. He said nothing. She left. Ji-yeon did not follow her immediately. She stayed in the corner of the room while the other family members gathered their copies and moved toward the door with the careful neutrality of people who needed to put some distance between themselves and what had just happened, and she stood there looking at the floor. Jae-hyun waited until the room had mostly cleared. Then he looked at his sister. She looked up. Her eyes were dry but red at the edges. She had been crying at some point this morning, or close to it, and she had the specific look of someone who has been stopped from crying by the need to be in a room where crying would be a vulnerability. "Ji-yeon," he said. "I know," she said. Her voice was rough. "Do you?" She looked at him. Her jaw was tight. "I know what I did. You don't need to. I know." "I'm not sure you do." He wasn't angry. He had been angry hours ago in the car, reading the document. He had moved through the anger and out the other side into something colder and more permanent. "You signed your name to something designed to end my marriage. You weren't manipulated into it. You understood what it was." "I thought," she started, and then stopped and started again. "I thought she was wrong for you. I thought," "That's not a reason, Ji-yeon. I know. A reason would have been talking to me. Coming to me and telling me your concerns, like a person who actually cares about me instead of—" He stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Did you talk to her? About Amara? Directly? Any time in 3 years? Did you have one honest conversation with her? Ji-yeon was quiet. Once, she said finally, very quietly. When? At the New Year dinner 2 years ago. She looked at her hands. I was rude to her. I said something and she didn't react the way I expected. She just looked at me and said that she understood I didn't know her yet and that she hoped someday I would let her fix that. A pause. And then she asked me if I wanted more tea. The room was nearly empty. Dae-hyun had gone. Min-jun was waiting in the corridor. Amara was still in her chair, and Jae-hyun could feel her listening without looking. I didn't know what to do with that, Ji-yeon said, so I kept being the way I was, because it was easier. Then what? She looked up. Eyes were very direct now, painfully direct, the way they got when she was telling the actual truth underneath the version she normally told. Then admitting I had been wrong from the beginning and I didn't know how to go back and fix it. Jae-hyun looked at his younger sister. He looked at the girl who had followed him through the house and fallen asleep on his shoulder and called him 3 times when her first relationship ended. And he looked at the 26-year-old who had signed her name to a document designed to erase his marriage. And he tried to hold both of those people in the same space. It was the hardest thing he had done all morning, harder than the vote. You will have to fix it yourself, he said. I can't tell you how. I can't make it happen. If you want a relationship with my wife, that is between you and her, and she does not owe you one. Ji-yeon nodded, one short movement. And Ji-yeon. He waited until she was looking at him. If you ever put her name in a document like that again, if you ever come at her through paperwork or strategy or the back of someone else's plan, I will remove you from every position you hold in this organization, without a second conversation. She held his eyes. I know, she said. He left her standing in the corner of the empty room. The corridor was cool and quiet and smelled like the old stone of the house that he had grown up in, the house where he had learned to walk and been taught to read, and had stood in the doorway last night watching his wife absorb the worst of his family's architecture with a fork in her hand. Amara was beside him. She had not said anything since the vote. She had stood up when the room cleared and come to stand beside him, and she had put her hand lightly on his back for a moment while he was talking to Ji-yeon, not directing him, not interrupting, just present. And now they were walking down the corridor together toward the front of the house, and he realized he didn't know what she was feeling. He had been watching her all morning with the attention of someone trying to read seismic activity, the small surface movements that told you what was happening below. She had been controlled and present and useful in ways that had genuinely shifted the outcome, and she had not performed any of it. But underneath all of it was something he hadn't been able to reach yet, something that had been accumulating since the cream envelope arrived on a Tuesday, and she had looked at him over it with eyes that already knew. He stopped in the corridor. She stopped beside him. She looked at him, waiting. Tell me, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Tell you what? What you haven't said yet. She exhaled through her nose. She looked at the stone wall beside them, at the old photographs of Kong men in their serious postures of ownership, and then she looked back at him. I am angry with you, she said. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way she said things that cost her something to say, with the flatness of truth that has been processed long enough to be stated cleanly. I know. I'm not angry about tonight, or this morning. She shook her head slightly. I'm angry about the 2 years before it. I'm angry about every time I said something about how your family treated me, and you said they'll come around, and I believed you because I wanted to believe you. I'm angry that I reshaped myself. I made myself quieter and more careful and less of things that are actually me, so that your family would have less to react to, and they built an operation against my name while I was sitting there being less. She said it directly, and without tears and without the tremor of someone who needs the other person to know how much it hurt. And that was the most devastating version of it, because it meant she had been sitting with this long enough to stop needing him to see the wound. She just needed him to see the truth. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I should have... Yes. She cut him off, not unkindly, just precisely. You should have. A lot of things, Jay. A long time ago. She looked at him steadily. But I also should have stopped swallowing things to protect your relationship with them. That was my mistake. I did that to myself because I thought love required it. It doesn't. He said nothing, because this was one of the moments where silence was the only appropriate response, and he had learned that enough, barely, but enough, to hold it. "I am not leaving you," she said. "That's not what this is. I'm telling you this because if we don't say it plainly, it sits in the floor of the house, and we step around it for years, and eventually, it's the whole floor." She looked at him with the particular directness of someone who has thought very carefully about what they need. "I need you to stop managing the distance between me and your family. Stop deciding how much I can handle and what should be kept from me and when to tell me things. I am not someone you protect by keeping things from." "The document," he began. "You should have woken me up," she said simply. "Last night, when you came home. You should have woken me up and told me." He thought about standing in the bedroom doorway, watching her sleep, deciding she needed rest more than she needed truth. He thought about the reasoning he had used, the logic that had felt protective and was also, he understood now, a form of control. The particular control of someone who believes that managing information is the same as managing harm. "Yes," he said. "I should have." She nodded. She looked at the floor for a moment. When she looked back up, some of the held tension in her face had shifted. Not released entirely, but moved, the way things move when they've been said and heard correctly. "I love you," she said. "That hasn't changed. I just need you to understand that loving me means trusting me with the hard things, not carrying them for me." "I understand," he said. "Do you?" He met her eyes. "I'm working on it. That's the most honest thing I can tell you." She looked at him for a long moment. Something passed through her face, an assessment, real and serious, and then something warmer underneath it. "That's fair," she said. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. They walked out of this ancestral house together, through the entrance hall with its old wood and its chandeliers that had looked golden last night and looked merely functional now, and through the front door and down the stone steps and into the morning air that was cool and sharp and tasted like pine trees and the particular clarity that follows a long night. Choi Soon-yi was not at the house when they left. She had taken her car before they reached the front door. Jae-hyun saw the tire marks in the gravel and the absence of her driver, and he stood at the top of the steps for a moment looking at the space where her car had been. He thought about what she had said. "You are your father's son." He had spent the drive to Dae-hyun's house and the drive to Byung-chul's back gate and the drive to Young Peel's front door, telling himself that this was about the organization, about leadership, about the structural integrity of what he had inherited. He had made the argument to Young Pil in exactly those terms, because those terms were real and accurate and would land with a man who thought in organizational structures. But standing at the top of the steps in the morning light, Amara's hand in his, he admitted to himself that it had not been about those things first. It had been about her. Just her. A woman standing at a banquet table with a fork in her hand, choosing to hold herself together for the sake of a marriage she believed in, even when the people in that marriage kept failing her in different ways. He had walked into that room last night because of her. He had driven to 3 houses in the dark because of her. He had laid documents on a table in front of people who held his future and spoke without his voice cracking because the alternative was watching her name be used to take her apart everything she was. His father, he suspected, would have done the same, for whoever his father had loved in that way. His mother knew that. It was why she had said it the way she had, not as a compliment, not as an insult, but as an acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a woman who had built something formidable and raised a son who would use every tool she taught him against the thing she built. If the thing she built threatened what he loved, she had made him exactly capable of this. He didn't know what to do with that yet. He supposed he didn't need to know today. Minjun drove them back to the city. Jae-hyun sat in the back with Amara, and they did not talk much, and the quiet between them was the good kind, the kind that has been earned rather than settled for, the kind that contains things rather than avoiding them. She fell asleep against his shoulder somewhere on the highway, her head heavy and warm, and he sat very still and let her sleep and watched the city come toward them through the windshield. Minjun glanced at the rear-view mirror once, said nothing, drove. The organizational consequences moved faster than Jae-hyun had anticipated, though he should have known they would. He had built an organization that responded to clear signals, and what had happened in that meeting room was a very clear signal. By the end of the week, the audit results were formally distributed to the senior organizational structure. The shell entity was dissolved. The finance director who had served as the coordination point was removed from his position, and the specific nature of his removal, not announced publicly but communicated clearly to the people who needed to know, served the function that such removals serve in organizations like this one. The mid-level coordinator from Busan, the one who had made the call, was reassigned to a role that was technically lateral and was understood by everyone to be exactly what it was. The organizational elders, who had attended the meeting and heard everything and said almost nothing, issued a brief formal statement supporting the current leadership structure. It was 12 sentences long and said nothing directly about what had happened, which was how organizational elders communicated when they wanted to make something clear without putting their names to the specifics. Ji-yeon's role in the family business was restructured, not removed. Jae-hyun had thought about removal and decided against it, not out of forgiveness, not yet, but because removing her entirely would have been clean in a way that the situation didn't earn. She had made a choice with her eyes open, and she would live with the reshaped version of what that choice left her. And she would do the work of rebuilding what she had damaged if she was capable of doing it. And Jae-hyun would watch from a distance and not decide the outcome in advance. Byung-soo called him 4 days after the meeting. The call lasted 6 minutes. Byung-soo did not apologize directly. He was not a man built for direct apology. But he said that he had acted on information he should have examined more carefully, and that he recognized his co-signature had caused harm, and that he hoped in time there would be a way to demonstrate a different kind of judgment. Jae-hyun listened. He said he appreciated the call. He meant it, partially. He ended the call without making any promises. Young-pil sent a gift, a bottle of aged whiskey and a single note that said only, "Sound leadership requires a clear view of who's holding the wheel." Jae-hyun put the bottle on the shelf in his office and thought about it sometimes. His mother did not call. He had not expected her to call, but he had also not expected the particular weight of her silence, the way it sat differently from the silence of someone who had nothing to say versus the silence of someone who had too much to say and no framework yet for saying it. She called 6 weeks later. He was in the office when his phone showed her number, and he sat looking at it for 2 full rings before he picked up. "Jae-hyun," she said. "Mother." A pause. He heard her breathing. Deliberate, measured, controlled even now, even in whatever this was going to be. "I would like to speak with you. Not about the organization, not about the family." Another pause. "Personally." "All right. I am not," she began, and then stopped, and started again, and he recognized the specific quality of the starting again because it was the quality of someone choosing words with unusual care, which for Choi Soon-yi meant the words cost her something. "I am not going to tell you that I was wrong to want what I wanted. I raised you to take over something real and significant, and I had," a pause, "specific ideas about what the person beside you should look like. Those ideas came from somewhere. I am not going to pretend they didn't." He said nothing. He waited. "But the method," she said, very quietly. "The method was—" She stopped again. For a long moment she was completely silent, and he sat with the silence and did not fill it. "I used the organization as a personal instrument. I used your name on a financial document you did not knowingly authorize. I sent you out of the city to leave your wife alone." The words came out measured and even and cost her something with every syllable. "Those things were wrong, the kind of wrong that I cannot explain away by pointing at what I wanted." He sat at his desk with his hand flat on the surface and his chest doing something complex. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I'm telling you that I know what I did, because you deserve to know that I know." He thought about what that cost her. He thought about Choi Soon-yi, 62 years old, who had managed the Kong family's fortunes and its image and its future for decades, who had never once in his memory admitted wrongdoing without framing it as strategy, who had just said, plainly, those things were wrong. And he tried to understand how much it had taken to get to this phone call. "Thank you for calling," he said. A pause. "Will you—" she began and stopped. "What?" "Will you tell her that I called?" He considered that. He thought about Amara in the kitchen, or wherever she was right now, probably on a call with her South Sudan project coordinator, probably arguing cheerfully about water table measurements with someone 12 time zones away. He thought about what it would mean to her that his mother had called, and what it would mean to his mother that he told her. Yes, he said. I'll tell her. Another silence. This one felt different from the others. Not empty, not calculating. Something resting. She is stronger than I gave her credit for, Sunyi said. She said it very quietly, as though saying it at full volume would require her to sit with it more than she was ready to. Yes, Jaehyun said. She is. His mother said goodbye. He sat at his desk for a few minutes after the call ended, not moving, looking at his hand flat on the surface. At the edge of the desk his father had bought 20 years ago, at the organization he had inherited and was now, more clearly than before, at a cost he had not expected, actually running. He told Amara that evening. They were in the kitchen. She was cooking. Not because it was her night. They didn't have nights. They cooked when they wanted to cook and ordered food when they didn't, and never made a rule of it. But she was making the stew her grandmother had taught her, the one with the slow heat and the specific smell that meant she needed to think through something and preferred to do it with her hands occupied. He told her about the call. He told her what his mother had said in order, without softening or expanding. He told her that Sunyi had asked him to tell her. Amara stirred the stew while he talked. She did not stop stirring. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said those things were wrong. Yes. Not that she was wrong. He considered that. No, she said the method was wrong. Amara nodded slowly, still stirring. That's honest, at least. She's not pretending to have changed her mind about me. She's just acknowledging she crossed a line. Yes. She was quiet for a little longer. Is that enough for you? He thought about it carefully. It's a start, he said. A real one, I think. For her. For me, it's also a start, she said. Not an end, not an apology, a start. I understand. She looked over her shoulder at him then, just a look, brief and direct, the kind she gave him when she was seeing all the way to the thing he actually meant, rather than the surface of what he said. Good, she said. She turned back to the stove. He came and stood beside her and looked at the stew, which smelled extraordinary the way her grandmother's recipe always smelled. And the kitchen was warm, and the evening light was the low kind that turns everything slightly golden. And he thought about cream envelopes and long tables and pine trees at night, and the sound of doors closing on something that had ended. He thought about what it cost. All of it. Everything. The nights in the car, the 3 doors in the dark, the documents on the meeting room table, the call this evening, the specific price of being the kind of man who chose rather than defaulted, who walked toward something rather than away from it. It was not a small price. He did not intend to pretend it was small. But standing in the kitchen with Amar's shoulder almost touching his, and the smell of her grandmother's stew, and the low golden evening coming through the window, he thought that the alternative, the version where he had kept looking away, kept telling himself his family would come around, kept sending her into rooms alone and calling that protection, was a price he was not willing to have paid. Some prices are worth it. Some prices you understand only after you've paid them. 3 months after the meeting, Amara launched the expanded phase of the South Sudan project, the phase she had been planning for 2 years, the one with the secondary school infrastructure and the medical relay stations, and the water network extension into the northern regions. She launched it from Seoul on a Tuesday morning, on a video call that included her project director in Juba and 4 regional coordinators and a representative from an international development partnership that had taken 18 months to secure. Jae-hyun sat in the doorway of the study while she ran the call. Not in the room. She didn't need him in the room, and he knew better than to position himself in the middle of something that was entirely hers, but in the doorway, with his coffee, listening to her argue about logistics with the precision and intensity of someone for whom the logistics were never just logistics. She caught him there when the call ended. She looked at him in the doorway with his coffee and the slightly ridiculous expression he always had when he was watching her work, the one she had once described as looking like a man who has just remembered why he made a specific decision and is quietly pleased about it. "Were you listening the whole time?" she said. "Most of it. The part where I told them the water filtration timeline was optimistic and they needed to build in a full additional month?" "Yes." "And?" "You were right," he said. The timeline was optimistic. She gave him the look that meant she knew he couldn't actually evaluate the filtration timeline and was just agreeing with her. He accepted that look without argument. She shook her head slightly, the way she did when she was choosing not to make a point she could make, and she came to the doorway where he was standing and reached past him to set her tablet on the shelf. She smelled like her work, like the coffee that had gone cold while she was on the call, like the particular focus that settled on her when she was in the middle of something that mattered. "The Northern Region phase," she said. "The one with the relay stations." "Yes?" "There's a funding gap. Third-party partnership covers 70%. I need to find the remaining 30 from somewhere." She was looking at the shelf, not at him, the way she looked when she was thinking through a problem and hadn't decided whether she wanted company in the thinking. "I was going to go through the Foundation's existing channels, but the timeline is tight." "How much?" he said. She named the figure. He did the calculation. "I can close that directly, through a clean organizational channel, documented, transparent, no structures you don't know about." She looked at him then. He held her gaze. "I'll want the documentation," she said. "You'll have it." "All of it." "Not just the summary." "All of it," he said. She studied him for a moment. The assessment she had always given him, the real one, not the social one, that saw the full board of who he was rather than the version he presented. He sat with it the way he had learned to sit with it, not managing it, not trying to shift what it found. "Okay," she said. It was not a small word between them. It hadn't been a small word between them for a long time. It was the word she used when she had looked at something fully and decided to trust it. Not blindly, not without conditions, but deliberately, with open eyes. The same way she had looked at a man at a fundraising gala who asked her about pipeline logistics and called 2 weeks later about a water filtration detail, and decided, after looking at him fully, to let that be the beginning of something. He took her hand. She let him. In the Kong ancestral house, the banquet room was repaired and repainted over the winter. New photographs went up alongside the old ones, not replacing them, but beside them. There was one of Jae-hyun and Amara at a humanitarian partnership event the previous spring, her in a suit jacket and him in a rare moment of genuine unguarded laughter beside her. Dae-hyun had hung it himself, in the corridor outside the formal study, at eye level. Nobody commented on it. It simply was. Ji-yeon called Amara in November. Amara had been at the airport, about to board a flight to Nairobi for a site visit. She saw the name on the screen and stood in the boarding line for a moment looking at it. She picked up. Ji-yeon said, "Ed, I know you don't owe me anything." Amara said, "I know you know that." A pause. "I wanted to say," Ji-yeon started, stopped. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it correctly, and I've given up on correctly. I treated you the way I treated you because it was easier than looking at why I was doing it. That's the truth. There's no better framing." Amara was quiet for a moment. The boarding line moved forward. "I appreciate you saying it plainly," she said. "I don't expect anything from it. I needed you to hear it from me, directly." "I heard it," Amara said. Another pause. The line moved. "You asked me once," Ji-yeon said quietly, "if you wanted more tea." Amara remembered it. She had not thought about it in months, but she remembered it. The New Year dinner, 2 years ago, Ji-yeon's rude remark that she'd absorbed without reacting to, and the tea. "I did," she said. "I've been thinking about that for 2 years," Ji-yeon said. "Why you did that instead of, I don't know, saying something, calling me out?" "Because I didn't know you yet," Amara said simply. "I wasn't going to decide who you were before I knew you." A long silence. Then Ji-yeon said, in a voice that was slightly rougher than before, Is there any version of the world where you might want to know who I am now?" The gate agent was scanning boarding passes. Amara took one more step forward in the line. "Maybe," she said. "That's not a no." "That's enough," Ji-yeon said quietly. "That's more than I deserve." Amara boarded her flight. She sat in her seat and put her headphones on, and looked out the window at the tarmac in the gray morning light, and she thought about all the rooms she had ever walked into, every calculation she had ever run before stepping through a door, every version of herself she had made smaller to take up less space in spaces that weren't sure they wanted her. She thought about the far end of a banquet table. A fork. 3 hours. She thought about what it had cost her. She thought about what she had not lost. The plane lifted. Seoul fell away beneath her, the grid of the city going small and then smaller and then gone. And ahead of her were the relay stations and the water networks and the 18 months of logistics that stood between a plan and a northern region that had clean water, and she had work to do, serious work, the kind that demanded everything she was. She opened her tablet. She got to work.